Well, we're very lucky in Britain to be a country that has always been a leader in maximising, making the case for free trade, which of course is one of the greatest forces for alleviating poverty and spreading wealth around the world that we've ever seen. We have this golden opportunity now that we're reclaiming an independent trade policy to be the standard bearer, that real cheerleader for free trade globally that Britain's always been, and to maximise the opportunities to benefit the world, but of course to benefit the UK, its economy and its people as well. So the idea is to build a support for free trade principles and for negotiating new free trade agreements amongst MPs. I mean, this is obviously a major thing the government's going to be concentrating on this year. So it's intending to educate, help parliamentarians who for years haven't particularly had this at the focus of their minds because it's been a European Union competence for so long, to have free trade principles and trade principles at the forefront of their mind and to support them. So the International Trade Select Committee is going to be undertaking the work of scrutinising government activity, particularly with regards to the two big pillars of this year's negotiations. The first of those, of course, is the future relationship with the European Union and the free trade agreement the British government hopes to secure. And also the second pillar, which is the really big opportunity of having an independent trade policy, which is the chance to have a free trade agreement with the United States, which is our biggest single trading partner, as well as a very close ally in, of course, many other spheres, most notably defence. But we also need to look at some of the other opportunities, and CANZUK is a good example of that. So that's Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, and that English-speaking world cooperation is something that's a really exciting opportunity. We already work very closely with those other countries in Five Eyes, in defence and intelligence is the obvious example, but there are great ties of language, of culture that go back many years, and it's been a very successful partnership. So it's an obvious first stage for us also to see what we can do to deepen and strengthen our trade relationships with those countries as well. So there's all sorts of opportunities there. A lot of that, of course, is around high-tech, digital spheres where distance is becoming increasingly less important in terms of global trade. There will also be some other areas which are harder to negotiate. Agriculture is a classic example of that, where, of course, we have a very strong and very successful UK industry. But it's also very key to make sure that we see that there are great opportunities for people who are producing goods of all kinds here, who can look forward to having a larger, greater share of markets abroad than they've had in the past. So I'd love to see the Commonwealth evolve to being much more than the quite loose set of nations that it is at present. We have so much in common. The English-speaking members of the Commonwealth are the obvious examples to start with: Canada, Australia and New Zealand, but then there's so many others. When you look at, like, for example, India, it's the largest democracy in the world. We have an enormous amount in common in terms of democracy, parliamentary democracy, legal systems. There's a lot of work there to be done as well. Now, I'd like to see how we can explore that in terms of deepening trade, as well as all sorts of other cooperation across the field. I think the classic example has to be immediately the high-tech digital thing, the things that Britain really, really excels in, and those things where distance is increasingly less of an obstacle to increasing trade. That has to be the obvious first place to start. But I don't see any reason why we can't look for all sorts of manufactured goods as well. It's all that high-tech stuff that Britain does really well, where we can really add value. There's a real market for that throughout the Commonwealth. So the United Kingdom has a really strong history of standing up for human rights and of being on the right moral side of those arguments. And I think it's very clear that we have a real advocacy role. It's a soft power role that we ought to be making that case throughout the world. And I think we ought to be showing that we want to trade with more countries, but equally we'd like to make sure that there aren't human rights abuses. And Britain has a good record, has a great moral case to make, and I think we ought to be doing that at the same time as looking for trade. I think in terms of looking at how we work with the EU in the sphere of defence after the transition period, I think the phrase cooperation but not amalgamation really sums up how I would feel about that. Everybody wants to work with people who are our close friends, our close partners in security as well as trade, but we'll want to make sure that we have autonomous decision-making capability in any eventuality. So we'll want to ensure that NATO remains the bedrock of our defence. We'll want to, by all means, deepen and enhance some of the security bilateral relationships that we already have, but we'll want to ensure that the UK is outside of any European command structures unless we wish to be a part of them. So there are going to be a number of key points that will require serious negotiation as we go forward and negotiate the free trade agreement with the European Union. And the key sticking point we're starting to see unfold already is that the European Union appears to have a desire to export its regulatory model to trade partners, and that's clearly something that the British government is not going to want to accept. So we are after, and we've been very clear that we are looking for a Canada-style free trade agreement that does not involve high alignment, that does not involve being a rule taker in terms of regulation of the economy. And the European Union has said that that is what it likes. That is clearly going to be a major negotiation point over the months ahead. So in terms of personal red lines, I take the view that I've always taken throughout the whole of this process, which is that I want to see democratic accountability for the rules that govern this country. I want them made here in this country by politicians that the public can elect and dismiss. That democratic accountability key is absolutely key to me. It seems to me to make no sense to leave the European Union and to remain tied to its rules without any say over their being made, and when you can't remove the people who are making those rules.